Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise.
I'm Dale. Just moved here from... Was there something between us anyway? I might not be the right one. It might not be the right time. But there's something about us I've got to do. Some kind of secret I will share with you. I need you more than anything in my life. I want you more than anything in my life. I'll miss you more than anyone in my life. I love you more than anyone in my life.
Great. How you doing, everybody? What's going on? Shalom. It's another beautiful evening, very beautiful because it's a new day, and where we're going to be going over another True Nation certified world history lesson. And today we are going from last week's, from the Babylonian period of captivity, into now the maybe less talked about and maybe less known Persian and Mede captivity. We're definitely going to break it down and explain that to you, expound to you. My name is Ahman again, and to my left right here is Brother
Yatazar.
and we are going to dig into this history like the archaeologists and anthropologists that we do on the net, because we can't afford to go out digging right now. All right, so the Persian and Mede captivity. Facts that you guys need to know. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have any picture PowerPoint type stuff tonight for you guys. So I will be expounding and explaining and citing some articles as best as I can, the ones that I do have pulled up for you guys, so you guys can dig and verify such of the things that I say. You guys can have some leads to maybe go forward on some more information for yourself. So the Persian and Mede captivity. This captivity, from this general summary, from beginning to end, it existed between the years 590 BC to 333 BC, 331 BC. And if those who really are avid on the history in this truth, we all know, or you all know, that 333 BC was a captivity dealing with the Greeks, when Alexander the Greek took over who? The Persians and the Medes. So the Persian and Medes were ruling after the Babylonians from 590 BC to 333 BC, around that. That's a little bit over 200 years, if not close to 300, if my math isn't incorrect, which it might be because I didn't actually do the calculations. But you guys get the general idea, the circa area of it. So let's get into this really quick too. So I like to figure out who these nations are, who they come from, because we all know after the flood, it was Noah and his 3 sons, and we as Israelites, come from one of those sons, the Shemitic line. So we want to figure out at the most basic ends where at least the Persians and the Medes came from, and right now we can get you a good lead with that and start with just in the name. Let's deal with the Medes first. Let's jump into the book of Genesis briefly and really quick. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 10 and verse 2.
It's the book of Genesis, chapter 10 and verse 2. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tabal and Meshech and Tyrus.
So we hear Japheth, Noah's oldest son at that time. He has 4 or so sons, and one of the sons' name is Madai. So just off of doing some etymology and some language and word studies, you guys will find in your research that Madai and Medes are stuff that's kind of changes in translation over time. It's a dialect. It's actually a dialect of the same name. That's one of the techniques that archaeologists in the field of word study use to find out who people are, especially utilizing the Bible across cultures. That's one of these skills and techniques. And so you can see just with the most basic consonants, the M, Madai, and the Medes, that's a parallel right there. If you guys do your own more research, you'll find, those more sources to confirm and verify that. But let's get something. Let's get a little bit more. I want to get an inscription that Darius, Darius the Persian, left himself. If you guys know anything about Darius, which we will learn more so tonight, we're going to see that Darius is actually a really important figure, a couple rather, important figures in the Persian Empire. This man named Darius. So, we're going to get this. This is from a website called the Iran Chamber Society. And Iran is significant because Iran is modern day Persia. So they know their history, much like they know our history as well too. But this, coming from the Iran Chamber Society, is an article, or not an article, but an archaeological placement called Darius the Great's. So this is the Darius that we're dealing with in Persia. Darius the Great's inscription at Nakshe Rostam. So you guys can look that up with me, or somewhat on your own time as well too. My computer. Don't do that to me now. Control Alt. Oh, I think I just saw it. Let me see real quick. Okay, now the thing is. All right, well, check this out. I think we only need to read the first 3 inscriptions, so I'm gonna read down to you guys right now, dealing with this is pretty much a burial tomb at the place Nakshe Rostam in Persia. That's archaeologists and the Persians themselves have kept preserved from his time and afterwards, because this was a place where they would bury their famous people and their kings and such. But this is the inscription that is wrote. 1. A great God is Ahura Mazda, who created this earth, who created yonder sky, who created man, who created happiness for man, who made Darius king, one king of many, one lord of many. Inscription 2. I am Darius, the great king, king of kings, king of countries containing all kinds of men, king in this great earth far and wide, son of High Tapsis and Archemenian, this is the Archemenian dynasty, a Persian, a son of a Persian, an Aryan, having Aryan lineage. So we touched on Medes, because this is the Persian and Mede captivity. But this man, Darius, who identified as a Persian, he said he was an Aryan of Aryan lineage. Now, Aryan people, when you look up, their history, you're going to find out a lot of information concerning them Indo-Europeans. Those two names are interchangeable. Aryans were just one peoples or one tribe of Indo-Europeans. And Indo-European stretches as far from Britain, Britain and Ireland, all those areas over there, Greece, coming up to Italy, where the future Romans would be, Corinth, and then Eastern Europe, Russia, and all the way over here towards India. And then, India is more east of Iran or Persia, but that area as well, too. So all that in between. That is the Indo-European stretch of land where anthropologists and archaeologists have noted and said they all have a similar language, and the Aryans were one of them. And the Aryans were just one of many tribes of Indo-Europeans. And it's definitely safe to say, with the Medes being close by them, that the Aryans themselves were a descendant of Japheth as well too. And that's actually why the Persians and the Medes had a joint kingdom. They had a joint kingdom because no different than in the southern kingdom of Judah, Judah was comprised of Judah and Benjamin, those two tribes, and Levi as well too. This is a similar instance dealing with the Persians and the Medes. The Persians are just one tribe of Japhetic descendant people, as well as with the Medes themselves. So that's some history that you guys you want to definitely look into. So again, look up the Darius the Great, Nakshe Rostam. He says it himself that he descends from the Aryan people. So that's the real Aryans, not Esau, as he calls himself in the prison system. We're not going to get into that, though. Okay, well, hopefully my mouse will start working soon. But until then, we can move on. So the Persian and Mede captivity. Before we're gonna get into scriptures right now in a second too. Before how do I want to say? Before they came up into power, you got to know that there is a transition point that we can find throughout prophecies written in some of the major prophets in the Bible, such as Jeremiah and Daniel. And we're going to bring those out for you right now. If we get to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 51, and we're gonna pick and choose, some of the main points of the verses that are in there. So we can all agree that the Persians and Medes came up after Babylon, right? If you don't agree, we can definitely have a I definitely actually advise you to watch the previous world history lesson if you don't believe that. But since we do believe that, this is what the prophet Isaiah had to say in dealing with not Isaiah, Jeremiah 51. Are we? Yeah. My bad. I was in the wrong book. This is what the prophet Jeremiah had to say in the 51st chapter dealing with Babylon. We're going to read Jeremiah 51 in verse 1.
You ready?
Yeah.
It's the book of Jeremiah, chapter 51 and verse 1. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up against Babylon, and against them that dwell in the midst of them that rise up against me, a destroying wind.
So this is the beginning of, we don't want to call the prophets long-winded, but we know they're very detailed in their descriptions of how they're going to prophesy either destruction or blessings upon Israel or the other nations. So this is just the beginning of letting us know and letting Babylon know at that time that Babylon, you're about to get destroyed. And now we're going to find out by who. We're going to jump down to verse 11.
Verse 11. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon, to destroy it. Because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple.
Khan. Yep. So right now it's saying the Medes are going to be the ones to take over the Babylonians at this point of time. So, man, still no cursor. That's crazy. So we're going to jump now into the book of Daniel and see how that time frame lines up. So we're going to go first to Daniel chapter 5. So we're dealing with history and the prophecy, or the history of prophecy as well too. So it said the Medes were going to come up against Babylon. If you guys are aware, when Daniel was in Babylon, he dealt with two people. He dealt with Nebuchadnezzar as a king, and then he also dealt with the next reigning king after that, Belshazzar. So we're going to pick up from Belshazzar's reign of Nineveh and the Babylonian strongholds that he had. So let's get to chapter 5 and verse 25.
It's the book of Daniel, chapter 5 and verse 25. And this is the writing that was written many Tekel, a far sin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. You want verse 27 too?
Yes, yeah, all the way to those big letters.
Con. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
Now that's actually a really interesting word to look at right there. The whole aspect of many tekel upfarshin, many tekel perez. I'm not going to break down the other words, but Perez is actually the name that the Persians called themselves. They called them the Parsin people. And it was the Greeks in later history that decided to call them, again, language through time and through other cultures, it kind of changes. The Greeks decided to call them Persians, but they called themselves, Parsin. So that's even relevant right there where it says Perez. And then it says, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians, which is just more proof that those two peoples were of the same lineage. They're always grouped together. It's not too much of a joint type of heritage you have with, separate nations holding the same exact position of power. They were of the same Japhetic line. So now read verse 29 and 29 all the way down to chapter 6.
Verse 29. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And that night was Belshazzar, the king of Chaldeans, slain. And Darius, the Median, took the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
So right there we have that prophecy being fulfilled as recorded in Daniel, that Jeremiah had spoken of much earlier in the Babylonian captivity, earlier in that 51st chapter. That was being fulfilled. So this is the start and the beginning of the relationship between Israel and the Persians and the Medes. So I want to emphasize too, this is only right now in Daniel's dealing with just the Mede portion, but we know that the Persians were the one that kind of had the name, but in co-ownership with the Medes. But first, again, when you look into history, it was the Medes themselves that actually began taking over as the Most High orchestrated in history to sack the Babylonian strongholds and empire, and eventually taking over all that themselves. So now I want you to start in chapter 6 and read from verse 1, and we're going to explain from verse 1 through 5, and we're going to go, and we're going to jump around somewhere else.
It's the book of Daniel, chapter 6, and verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm.
So this relationship is very, very important, and I'm going to drive the point later on as this lesson goes on as well too. Daniel was not only favored in the Babylonian captivity, but he was favored amongst Darius the Mede, which was going to lead into the Persian and Mede captivity. Matter of fact, as we're going to read the rest of this chapter, we're going to see how much preferred that this king, they call him Darius, and you guys should know too, Darius is generally kind of just a title. Darius wasn't the actual name of this individual, because you guys will see if you guys do some of your study, you're not going to find a lot of people name-wise verbatim in the same chronological time frame that's the truth of it. A lot of the times the scriptures and nations themselves, they give themselves names that to us today we don't really get it, but for them they're more so like titles. Like for instance, in Rome, to be called Caesar, that was a specific title. Julius Caesar. Caesar wasn't his name, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Julius either. But that was like that was an encompassing title that came with pretty much your position of power. You became a Caesar. These people, a lot of them became Dariuses. That's why you often see Darius repeated by name over and over when dealing with the Persians. So it's the same. It's the same thing kind of going on. And just for your fun facts, Darius actually means the one that holds. You know, the not the beholder, but the one that holds on to, because a king holds on to vast territories. So that's what Darius means. This particular Darius, the Mede. So we're gonna read into the relationship very briefly and quickly. We're not gonna read the whole scripture, but we're gonna get this relationship between him and Daniel. So read from where you left off. I believe it should be verse 5. Yeah, 4.
Daniel chapter 6, verse 4. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. Verse 7. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions.
So I'm going to explain this story a little bit just for time's sake, you know, so we can stay on track. So everyone, maybe you guys know, have heard Daniel in the lion's den. That's a pretty famous Sunday school, you know, story that people, you know, go off of. This is that instance right here, dealing with the Persians and the Medes. So Daniel is basically being set up by his other, not superiors, but his other, president co-workers, because they were all just short of being under the king, and Daniel having the most favor of them all. So they, obviously, these nations, time and time again, you're going to see these other nations that are under a particular nation's rule, if it's not Israel, are very jealous of us when we're doing the right thing. And the pattern throughout this captivity with the Persians is we were always given the liberty to do the right thing, you know, according to our God, Most High Yahweh. We always had the liberty to keep our commandments. But these people, these co-worker presidents, they are at the position and point now to where they're going to set Daniel up. So they basically fabricate a law and decree, say, hey, for the next 30 days, anybody that worships any god or any man, he should be put to death in the lion's den. So the King Darius the Mede at this time, not really considering Daniel at the moment, he signs it into he signs the decree in there, because, you know, a lot of kings kind of have that ego about themselves, like, oh yeah, that's fine, 30 days, you know, they can you know, look up to me. But knowing that the Persians and the Medes kind of were collectively taking other nations of people that had their own gods, you know, he just said for 30 days, that'll be cool, but without consideration of his beloved servant Daniel. So he gets Daniel, obviously, you know, this isn't the first time that he hasn't listened to the decrees of another nation preventing him from worshiping the Most High Yahweh. So Daniel keeps doing what he's been doing best, being righteous and worshiping the Most High God Yahweh. So them, just to briefly summarize, they spy on him and they catch him worshiping the Most High, and they bring it and send it to the king. And this is the king's reaction when he finds out that it was Daniel that was caught and now has to be put to death, because once the king's words goes out, it has to be, your word has to be kept. And that was a decree that was set. So now let's jump down in that same chapter, verse 14. So this is the reaction of King Darius the Mede himself. Read that.
Verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed.
Look at those bastards. Keep going.
Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee.
This is a very important line that the king of the Medes said right here, because it shapes the whole dynamic of what we're going to touch on, the whole dynamic of the relationship between Israel and the Persian and Mede captivity and Persian history itself. It's going to be a beautiful thing. We're going to bring it out soon. Continue on.
Verse 17. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting, neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him.
Read down to verse 20.
Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel, well, that's, you want 21?
Yeah, keep going, yep.
Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel and hath shut the lion's mouth, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him, what is that?
For
innocency?
Innocency, yep.
Innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceedingly glad for him.
Now let's jump down. I wanted you to just read that to verse 25.
So you want to go to 25 right now?
Yep.
Verse 25. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. You want verse 20? Okay, come on. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even until the end.
So, we're going to cut that chapter right there. So you guys see the importance and the relationship, which was by through the Most High God Yahweh, between the king of the Medes and the king and Daniel himself. Now, this is some history tidbits for you guys to know. The Persians are most notably known in their empire to practice what's called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism was you'll hear from a lot of matter of fact. Ooh, my cursor is working. We're gonna read this. I'm gonna read this from the Jewish Encyclopedia. This is from JewishEncyclopedia.com on the religion Zoroastrianism of the Persian and Mede people. And it reads this: the religion of ancient Persia, as founded by Zoroaster, one of the world's great faiths that bears the closest resemblance to Judaism and Christianity. According to the tradition in the Parsi books, so again, Parsi, many Teco Peris, that's what they call themselves, Parsi. Zoroaster was born in 660 BC and died in 583. Now, check this out. This person, Zoroaster, which is known in his religion as a prophet unto, this belief of monotheism, because before this, the Persian and Mede people were polytheistic. They believed in many gods, no different than Egypt and Babylon. But there was a turning point, and this turning point just so happened to be aligned with the same time that Daniel was in this position of authority with the Mede people. And that was, again, and the check this out. So Zoroaster was allegedly born around 660 BC and supposedly died in 583 BC. the Persian and Mede captivity didn't start until 590 BC. So these time frames of this particular person and Daniel being in this captivity are lining up. So I'm going to read some more. Ooh. Come on. Come on, cursor. Looking for this cursor to check. Okay. So we're going to read here. But many scholars claim they must have flourished at a much earlier time. See, they don't know how 100%. All investigators, however, are agreed that his teachings were generally enforced throughout Iran before the time of Jewish captivity. His name is an ancient form of Avesta, Zoroaster, and in ancient Persian, Zarathustra. So we're going to jump down. I'm going to summarize this because this goes into a lot of details, but it said right here in the beginning that this religion was the closest religion in that area, closest to Judaism. Now, here's the thing. Daniel's influence as being a top president in the Medes was so phenomenal that we just read right now that Darius, king of the Medes, he implemented that everyone needs to worship the God of Daniel. You know, everyone in all parts of these kingdoms, y'all all need to worship this one God. He acknowledged the Most High God, Yahweh, this Darius the Mede. So it's no discrepancy or how do they say coincidence that this possible person, this Zoroaster, the creator of this monotheistic belief in a supreme God, it's no coincidence that either one, he was directly taught by Daniel himself or whomever around that believed in, or could possibly have been Daniel himself in a translation with the Persian language. Those are things to consider, but all these time frames are lining up. This is a sudden change from the Persians having a polytheistic to a monotheistic belief in a supreme God during this same time frame. So that's information that you guys might want to just look into and read up into. Somebody could dig a little bit further from there. But that's Daniel's instance with this particular king. And to prove who this king is, that he was a real king, we're going to get to the book of Bel and the Dragon out of your Apocrypha. Bel and the Dragon, and just read verse 1 and 2. And we're going to see the time frame that this book deals with.
Hold on.
Okay.
You said verse 1 and 2?
Yep, chapter 1.
All right. And King Astyages was gathered to his fathers, and Cyrus of Persia received his kingdom. And Daniel conversed with the king and was honored above all his friends.
So we see now that Daniel was still alive when this person, King Astyages, he died. Because when you go back, when it says he was gathered to his fathers, that meant he just died. And then another well-known Persian king, Cyrus of specifically Persia, received the kingdom. So this was a direct transfer of power that was one king for the other. No different from President George Bush of America to Barack Obama being president. That was the situation right after. So now when you look through history of the Persians and the Medes, you'll find that the Medes themselves, and this is something you can find on Wikipedia, they had a king with its exact same name. The last king of the Medes was Astyages. So that's who this king was that Daniel dealt with in the lion's den. It was King Astyages of the Medes. And then shortly after, the Persians merged their kingdom with the Medes and became the Persian and Mede captivity. And that's why we're dealing with, in Bel the Dragon, Cyrus of Persia. And that's in the Apocrypha, Bel and the Dragon. So now we're going to get that confirmation right back again in the book of Daniel. And we're going to go to the time when Cyrus came out in the book of Daniel is in chapter 10. This king is noted. Daniel chapter 10 and verse 1.
It's the book of Daniel, chapter 10 and verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar.
Mm-hmm.
And the king that was true, but the time appointed was long. And he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision.
So let me fix on one point. So during this time, the book of Daniel jumps in these chapters. It jumps between time frames. Don't read the book of Daniel thinking that it's all one continual type of lineage. Each chapter kind of goes back and forward in time between the Persian and Mede captivity. So at one point in this chapter, now we're dealing with Cyrus, who, the Persians coming in and co-joining with the Medes. Cyrus is mentioned at this point in time. But in the previous chapter and in the next chapter, even from there, we start dealing with Darius the Mede. So Darius the Mede is the king that Daniel deals with, and Cyrus the Persian is what Daniel deals with in this in the book of Daniel. So that's the chronology and the time frame dealing with that. So we're going to jump books right now to another scripture. We're kind of already dealt with Daniel and his relation to the Persian and Mede captivity pretty well. And I just want to point out again, one more time, summarize Daniel's relationship with Darius, or Darius the Mede, or Astyages, as you can find in Bel and the Dragon. His relationship was very well with him, to where he made him believe in his own God. Daniel pretty much, in his excellency, got this heathen to believe in the Most High God and his power. So this, again, makes the events dealing with this captivity very well. So we're going to move on to Cyrus now and get just some historical information about him in the scriptures. Is he all right? Oh, yeah. So, Yaquab, you want to answer the door? Someone's at the front door. Let's get to the book of Isaiah, chapter 44. Isaiah 44. Yeah, Isaiah 44 and verse 28.
It's the book of Isaiah, chapter 44 and verse 28. That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasure. Even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built into the temple, thy foundation shall be laid.
So right here, this is Isaiah, who was prophesying during the he prophesied for a lot, and I'm not gonna go out on a leg and say, but Isaiah for the most part was prophesying during the Babylonian captivity. So he already called it that this person Cyrus was gonna be, a willing tool of the Most High. And we just saw in Daniel how much of a willing tool that the previous king before Cyrus was for the Most High. So this prophecy all lines up. Read chapter 45 and verse 1 in the same book.
It's the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 1. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the lions of kings to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut.
So we see here right now that even in Isaiah, before we even get to Nehemiah, Ezra, and Esther, it was already known that Cyrus was going to be a willing instrument of another nation, of another empire nation, rather, to be used by the Most High. And read verse 28 again. It says exactly what Cyrus is gonna allow Israel to do.
That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasure. Even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built into the temple, thy foundation shall be laid.
So it was prophesied that when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, that Cyrus was going to allow Jerusalem and the temple to be rebuilt. And now we're going to segue into, history and scriptures, the book of Ezra. The book of Ezra, dealing with, I'm going to summarize right here at the top of my head, some of the most prominent people to come out during the time of Ezra's and Nehemiah was a priest named Zerubbabel, Ezra himself, and then Nehemiah. So I don't want you guys to forget about the man Zerubbabel, because he laid some important foundation coming back to Jerusalem just before Ezra. Even though the book is named after Ezra, Zerubbabel is a very important figure in history, Israelite history as well too. So let's get to Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1.
It's the book of Ezra, chapter 1, verse 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying,
Continue.
Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him in a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah, who is there among you of all his people. His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem.
So this is all again that special type of favor that the Most High gave us, our forefathers, under this captivity. That again you could see through the religion Zoroastrianism, however much they were keeping the Most High's laws themselves, which you read into their text, they actually had some things on point, which is why I'm sure, again, either Zoroaster was Daniel himself or someone that Daniel was closely teaching to show the rest of the Persians. But this Cyrus, again, he's now commanding that Israelites Judah go back to Jerusalem and build up the temple of the Most High, acknowledging that this is the house of the living God. So they knew, and they accepted. And that's the beautiful thing about this particular captivity. But with all beauty and easy, even from the ruling hand, it didn't come that easy. Throughout the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, you see there's a couple of attempts of, again, these other nations, no different than when Daniel dealt with the other presidents. The other nations are jealous. They don't like that this is happening. They don't like that the king is ordaining Judah to come back and build the temple of the Lord, especially the ones that live by Israel, dealing with Moab and Ammon and even Edom. They already knew us up, because they had to deal with Israel since the time of David and the time of Solomon when the kingdom was first set up. So they already know the might of Israel, just by historical experience. So throughout these books, you find that they gave Israel a hard time, up to a number of different kings and periods. And I want to bring those kings out within the Persian and Medes. So let's jump into chapter 4. Start at verse 1 and read down to around 7.
Ezra chapter 4 and verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esar-Haddon, king of Assur, which brought us up hither. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our God, but we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building.
So already you see that they were lying from the get-go. It's a straight up lie. How are you going to say, we want to help you, but then you get rejected, and then you make life more difficult and hard on us or our forefathers? Straight up lie. Read the rest.
And hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
So that's a gap of leadership. So just in case you didn't know, if you look up the chronology of Persian kings from Cyrus, because Cyrus was the first king of Persia, and even though there was previous Mede kings, Cyrus was the first one to be acknowledged of the Persian Medo captivity as the first king. So from Cyrus, he said, all the way to Darius, and this is Darius the Great. Darius the Great was as equal in greatness as Cyrus, because Darius allowed Israel to do what they needed to do, and he also himself believed in the Most High God Yahweh. Matter of fact, that inscription I read earlier in the lesson where Darius said that he was of Aryan descent, that's part of when he said he believed in the God. Let's get that name, and this is a title basically of the Most High. When he said he believed in Ahura Mazda, he was basically saying in his own tongue he believed in the God of Israel. That was just how, no different that we call the Most High God, the Most High or God or Lord, or even, not that anybody does this, but Baal. Sometimes that's an epithet used to refer to a power or a god. That was the same thing that Darius this Great was utilizing as well too, acknowledging the God of Israel. But between Cyrus and Darius, and then and some. So read on.
Verse 6. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of what is that?
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes wrote Bashlam, Mithridath, Tabeel, and the rest of their companions until Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue. And
that's it. That's right there. I just wanted to get, because again, this is a history lesson on the Persians and the Medes. My goal is to get you to understand the actual extra biblical world history and compound it and see it in the scriptures themselves. So we're going to dig into two of these kings. It said Ahasuerus, that came after Darius the Great, and then Artaxerxes. Ahasuerus, this Ahasuerus is the same Ahasuerus that's mentioned in the book of Esther. So now to kind of help you guys compound biblical timelines and time frames, the book of Esther happened during this time written in the book of Ezra. So a lot of us ignorantly, and myself included until studying, would think that, okay, Esther comes after Ezra and Nehemiah. So obviously, see, I'm telling you, bro, and it's nobody's fault. That's just our lack of understanding of the holy text. But the book of Esther is not sometime in the future after the events of Nehemiah or even Ezra. The book of Esther is actually a book and event that happened right in between, in this verse of Ezra chapter 4 and verse 6. That's when the book of Esther was happening. So with that being said, I think it would be good to jump into that, because just for the sake of keeping time for chronology's sake, because that's, I think, is the most important thing for us to understand the history, is getting the chronology of world history in the scriptures. So we're going to jump into the book of Esther, since we're dealing with Ezra chapter 4 and verse 6, mentioning this king Ahasuerus. So let's go there briefly and quickly. So the book of Esther, you can read chapter 1 and verse 1.
The book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even into Ethiopia, over 107 provinces. That in those days when the king of Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace.
Okay, so just wanted to bring that out. This is the same Ahasuerus. So, briefly explaining the book of Esther, if you don't know, Esther was a niece of an Israelite man named Mordecai, who was chosen and picked out of many women and beautiful women that were in the kingdom at this time to be picked and chosen to be King Ahasuerus' wife. Esther eventually does become groomed and chosen to become King Ahasuerus' wife. But also there's an enemy to Israel and Mordecai, a man named Haman, also called Ahman, or some people pronounce it as Ahman, Ahman in other translations such as throughout the Apocrypha. This Haman is an Edomite, is an Edomite that is pretty much against all the ways and the wills of the Israelite people, probably knowing the history of his forefathers, or just having that spirit in him that just does not like us. So this Haman works his way up in the kingdom, much like Mordecai is at. So they're pretty much at somewhat equal levels, no different than Daniel and the other presidents. And this Haman, again, he hates Israelites, and he sets up Israel no different than the many times before dealing with in the book of Daniel. He sets up Israelites on a particular day to be killed, so that all nations would go against the Israelites and kill them. And that was supposed to be on the 13th day of the month Adar. And that's also more history as far as why we celebrate Purim. Maybe we'll touch in more on that if we have time later. But that's the general sum of the book of Esther. The ending of it is that Haman's plans did not come to fruition, and he actually, the king himself, sets up what Haman had set up to kill Israel, or rather Mordecai, with in the same fashion. So Mordecai, Haman, dies Mordecai's expected death by the authority of the king Ahasuerus. Now we're going to, that's the biblical history, and we're going to put out a little bit more, and I'm going to bring that into world history, who this king Ahasuerus actually really was. So right now we're going to get to, in your Apocrypha, get to the book of Esther. This is one that isn't really brought out too much and a lot in lessons, but it has some really good historical proofs in there. So if we get to the rest of Esther in your guys' Apocrypha, mine's is on page 81. Yours might not be, but you can still figure it out. So in the rest of this book, we're going to read from, let's read on chapter 16.
All right, chapter 16.
And in verse 1.
It's the book of Esther, chapter 16, verse 1. The great king
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes unto the princes and governors of 127 provinces from India unto Ethiopia, and unto all our faithful subjects, greeting.
So this lines up perfectly just with the book of Esther in the regular Bible, and chapter 1, verse 1. Same exact thing. Same exact province numbers. Same exact area from India to Ethiopia. It says the same thing. It's just that now he's, instead of being called Ahasuerus, he's called Artaxerxes. So I know that that could be confusing for a lot of you, but what's important is understanding the context of the time frame that these people, these notable people, are mentioned in. So now that we heard of that, now let's jump down in that same chapter, and we're going to read verse 7 and down.
Verse 7. Now ye may see this as we have declared, not so much by ancient histories as ye may, if ye search what hath been wickedly done of late through the pestilent behavior of them that are unworthily placed in authority. And we must take care for the time to come that our kingdom may be quiet and peaceable for all men, both by changing our purposes and always judging things that are evident with more equal proceeding.
Now, before we get this verse, so he's basically saying we need to be diligent about keeping watch for wicked people in our kingdom, dealing with the Persians. Because if you didn't know, this Ahasuerus has been attempted to get assassinated once already. And that's why Mordecai was put in the position that he was in, because he was actually the one to let the king's servants know that, so that Ahasuerus was saved. So Ahasuerus is basically saying we need to be on point with, our security. So now read on in verse 10, and we're going to find out something about this Haman in the book of Esther in the regular Bibles we have.
For verse 10, for Ahman, a Macedonian, the son of Amadatha, being indeed a stranger from the Persian blood and far distant from our goodness, and as a stranger received of us, had so far forth obtained the favor that we show toward every nation, as that he was called our father and was continually honored of all men as the next person unto the king. But he, not bearing his great dignity, went about to deprive us our kingdom and life, having by manifold and cunning deceits sought of us the destruction, as well of Mardicus, who saved our life and continually procured our good, as also a blameless Esther, partaker of our kingdom with their whole nation.
Read on.
For by these means he thought, finding us destitute of friends, to have translated the kingdom of the Persians to the Macedonians.
Right there. That's a big block of history right there. So I want to point out some things. So this King Ahasuerus, he's basically saying and acknowledging this person, Haman, who was a Macedonian. Do you guys know? You guys are going to find out how important that is in a second right now if you don't know. Haman was an Edomite of Macedonia already, and he was in the Persian kingdom to overthrow it. Not only just the Jews, but to overthrow the Persians themselves. If you guys know anything about the history of how the Persian Empire fell, what kingdom took over the Persians and the Medes? It was the Greeks of Macedonia. Alexander the Great was from Macedonia. Alexander the Great was an Edomite. So do you see how they maneuvered themselves in even into the pre-history of the Persian and Mede kingdom, how they were already there making power moves, and this was acknowledged, and world history acknowledges as well too. This King Ahasuerus is actually, who's seen the movie 300 back in the day? It's like 2008, 2007. That movie, with the Spartans and stuff like that. That king, that effeminate, almost half naked Speedo king, that was called Xerxes in that movie. That's how they portrayed him in the fiction. But that's actually the same king. This King Ahasuerus, or Artaxerxes mentioned in Esther in the Apocrypha, this is the same guy. And you know what what Xerxes did in that movie, or rather in the history? He went and confronted the Greeks because he was trying to get them to be part of his kingdom. If not, he was going to make war with them. And this is a real historical event called the Greco-Persian Wars. This was in 490 BC, a little bit before the complete takeover of the Persian Empire. This is a real thing, the Greco-Persian Wars, and there was King Xerxes that was in power during this time, during these wars. And we read it right here out the Bible, mentioning that Haman the Macedonian, he was a Macedonian, tried to come beforehand. So that's why those wars did happen back then between the Persians and the Macedonians. And eventually in 333 BC, leading to the fall of the Persian and Mede captivity. But that's the real history written right here in the scriptures. So the scriptures, as brothers say, the scriptures are on point. And you can read it too. You can read it in the Bible dictionary, the Zondervan's Bible dictionary, the same thing. A lot of times it'll say it is supposed or it is thought that Ahasuerus was King Xerxes, but we just have, we just have more proof in the pudding of all these points and dots being connected together, that it's by sound reason that these are the same people. Same thing with the sound reasoning about Zoroaster, the creator of Zoroastrianism, being possibly Daniel or a follower of Daniel during that time. All these things, they come together and line up. So that's dealing with the book of Esther, and we segued into that out of the book of Ezra. So let's go back into that really briefly. We're not going to have too much to say because a lot of this captivity is summed up between Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, some of the scattered accounts in the Apocrypha, and the beginning of First Maccabees, which we'll definitely pull out. But let's get back to where we were in Ezra, chapter 4 and verse 7. So we're not going to read it, but it mentioned Artaxerxes right after Ahasuerus. So we don't really have too much biblical written experience for this particular king, Artaxerxes, but we do know that in the short time period from there, that the temple of the Most High was finally finished. We read that in Ezra chapter 6 and verse 15. You can read that, and we're going to jump on. Ezra chapter 6 and verse 15.
Book of Ezra chapter 6 verse 15. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was in the sixth year of the reign of Darius the king. Verse 16. And the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites and the rest of the children of the captivity, kept the dedication of this house of God with joy.
So when the temple was first rebuilt, the first construction of the destroyed temple, that was built in the kingship of Darius the Great. And then history happens, more so after that. We have, dealing with Artaxerxes, which is also mentioned later in the chapter, but we're not going to really pull too much out of that. And you have, the rest of the book of Nehemiah, which is, again, a continued influx of Israelites from the southern kingdom coming back into Jerusalem to live there and to take over. So there's not too much Persian history mentioned in the book of Nehemiah. You just take it as more so the Israelite history that is written in there. So you guys can, by all means, read that book yourselves. So lastly, we're going to get into, what was already spoke about, the book of First Maccabees, chapter 1 and verse 1. This is pretty much a big jump forward into history, but it's understood that under the Persian rule, Israelites had it relatively comfortable in that captivity. The Most High had some good slack on us, because, again, they believed in our God. And a lot of their kings, a couple of them, a good handful, I want to say 3 or 4 of them, believed in some of the major figures like Daniel and Mordecai and Esther themselves, along with our God. So things were already, working well. But all good things in this world tend to come to an end, and we have the final uprising of the Greek people. Let's get First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 1.
And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth.
And that's the end of the Achaemenid or the Persian dynasty. So is it any coincidence that Haman of Macedonia, the Edomite, did the same thing as Alexander the Great of Macedonia, the Edomite? These things are, the scriptures and the truth and the reality of these bloodlines and the history of it all, it speaks for themselves. It's just, Most High willing, we all have the eyes and the ears to see it and to behold it. But that's pretty much the end of the comfort of the Persian and Mede captivity. I would say one of the most unique captivities that Israel has ever been in this time frame during this time. So that ended in 333, 331 BC. Israel saw a completely different, ugly face of being in captivity from that point on. This concludes a dive into the Persian and Mede captivity lesson. We hope that you guys got good kernels and nuggets to increase your faith and, more importantly, your understanding. Well, no, just as importantly, your understanding in this Bible, in this text, in the scriptures. And we hope that it was edifying. Definitely give us some feedback sometime, comments, whatever. Talk to us sometime about what you think about, these lessons, this lesson itself. So without any further ado, we're going to call it an end right there, the end of the Persian and Medes. My name is Ahman Allah again, and to my left,
Yatazar.
and we are out.
Revelation 2:9. Tell them. Yeah, all my brothers, yeah, we rich shock. We got the truth, we come from rich stock. That's in my tribe, I never flip-flop. Thy kingdom come, now watch it TikTok. We got this truth and now we rich up. We headed back up to the tip top. Menorah golden, watch it drip drop. We in the hood, but now we rich up. Yeah. My folks stayed in the Hoovers. I was born in the trades. I was raised in the hundreds, but I ain't never joined the gang. Affiliated, I was with it. I ain't played no games. Wasn't banging, but I had to show I ain't no lame. Copperworth Entertainment, yeah, I did my thing until I woke up to this truth and found out we still slaves. Niggas killing over colors. Time to rise up for our brothers. Time to unify our hustles. Time to lead our baby mothers out to lay like Nazareth. I was raised about the gutter. For the homies, I got locked up. Not a word I never uttered. So for Yasharala, yeah, you best believe I'll die. This ain't Christianity, you best believe yeah, I'll ride. Brothers, yeah, we rich shock. We got the truth, we come from rich stock. That's in my tribe, I never flip-flop. Thy kingdom come, now watch it TikTok. We got this truth and now we